Welcome back. Let's cover access modifiers and getters and setters. So a few videos ago, we wrote this code. We called a no arguments constructor, and then we directly set each value. x.name is equal to ps5. This is awful. You should never do this. We only did this because we weren't ready to talk about constructors. So why is this code bad? So far, we have coded in two places, main.java and product.java. Java treats these places very differently. Here's an example. Let's say you order a package from Amazon. You have an Amazon worker that boxes up all of your stuff, puts it in the box, and then sends it to the driver. The driver then delivers it to you when you eagerly wait for your Peaches delivery. Who is allowed to open the box and move stuff around? The Amazon worker can because they're creating the box, and you're the receiver of the box. Do you want the driver to be able to open up your box and touch everything inside? No. Main.java is like the driver. You don't let the driver touch the stuff inside. And product.java is like the approved people that are certified to touch your stuff, whether it's you or the person creating your box. Another way to think of this is main.java is outside of the class, and product.java is inside the class. What this means is we're going to use access modifiers. Public means anyone outside the class can touch your stuff. That's what we had before, but we're going to change it to private. Private means only someone inside the class or someone approved can touch your stuff. The default access modifier is public, which is why main.java was able to touch it, even though we didn't specify anything. Okay, I'm over here in main.java, and just to reiterate, I have a product, and when I call the dot operator, I can directly access name, description, in stock, and price. I can directly access the fields. This is bad. We don't want this. So I'm going to go over to product.java, and I'm going to look at our fields. The default access modifier in Java is public, which means even though we didn't specify, all of these values are and were public. So let's go ahead and add the modifier. Public, 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 and public. Public means that anyone outside the class can touch your stuff. So coming back over to main.java, nothing is different. When I use the dot operator, I can directly touch name, description, in stock, and price because the default is public. Let's go back to product.java, and I'm going to change these to private. Private means that anyone outside the class can't touch your stuff. But if you are inside the class, which we are, you can touch your stuff. You are an approved person. So going back to main.java, when I call the dot operator, now you can see I cannot access name, description, price, or anything. So now as a delivery driver, I can't open your box and poke it. Okay, so we locked everything down with private. Now no one can touch our stuff. But what if we do want to change our stuff? There are use cases when we want to do this. We're going to do this with getters and setters. So we're going to create approved methods that allow people to get and set values, even if you're outside of the class, but they must do it in an approved way through the method. You can't just directly change stuff. Okay, so coming back to product.java, I'm going to go ahead and just delete these comments, and then I'm just going to give us some more space. Now, just FYI, typically you put your getters and setters here after the constructors, but for now, I'm going to put them up here just so we have some more space and we can focus. Okay, first we want to create our getters. getters get data. Very simple. So first it needs to be public. Remember, public means it can be accessed outside of the class, and that's what we want. This is our approved way of getting data. Now our name is a string, so we're going to return a string. And then a getter always has the same format. It's get, and then the name of the actual property. So it's get name. And notice, of course, we're using camel case. And then we're just going to return name. So going back to main.java, now that we have this method, I can call product.getName. And there's our method we just created. If I run this, you can see it printed just the name, so it printed just PS5. I'm going to do the exact same thing for description. So public, it returns a string, get description, and then return description. Same thing for price, public double get price, return price, and then lastly, public boolean. This one will be named slightly differently. So booleans are named with is. So we're going to use is in the name. So boolean is in stock, return in stock. You're kind of asking it a question, right? When I go back to main.java, if I do product.isInStock, it kind of reads like English, so it's easier to read. Okay, so that's our getters. Let's go ahead and now create our setters. I'm going to just go ahead and create some space again. So now we're doing our setters, and setters set data, of course. So it follows a similar format. So it's public because you need to be able to access it outside of the class. Now we want to set our name. If we're setting our name, it doesn't need to return anything. So void set name. And we do need to take in a string to set the name. So string, we'll call it n. And then we do name is equal to n. This should look really familiar. This is exactly what we did in our constructor. If we scroll down, we did the exact same thing here. We said name, and we set the value. Now remember what we covered in the previous video. You don't want to have a name that's just n. That's not very helpful, because if we go back to the main.java, if we do product.setName, all it says is give me n. Well, what does n mean? We want to have a better name so that we know what we're passing in. So we're going to change this to name. But again, like we covered in the last video, this confuses Java. It doesn't know which name you're referring to. Is it this name or is it that name? So we need to add the this keyword. And now it turns purple, so you know which one it is referencing. So we're going to use this format for our setters. So public void set description. We get a string description, and then this dot description is equal to description. And for the last two, I'm going to go ahead and use the IDE to help me out. I'm going to right click, generate. Notice you can generate getters, you can generate setters, and you can generate both. I'm going to click setters, and I'm going to command or control click onto both of them, and I'm going to click OK. And it automatically generated our set price and automatically generated our set in stock. So let's just test some of these out. I'm going to go back to main.java, and I'm just going to print a couple of things. I'm going to print product.getName plus a space plus product.getPrice. And then I'm going to go ahead and call a couple setter methods. So Set name, we'll say PS5 Slim. I don't know if they have a Slim, I'm just making it up. Product.set price, and we'll say $249.99. I wish, right? And then I'm just going to print out the product again. When I run this, we can see the printout of PS5 and $299 from this line of code. And then we set the name, we set the price, and we can see the new name and the new price has been updated. Okay, here's a quick chart on getters versus setters. So getters get data, obviously. Setters set data, obviously. An example for a getter is get name in camel case. An example for a setter is set description in camel case, but then you also have to pass in the value. Getters return the data type. Setters return void. Getters do not take in a parameter, and setters do take in a parameter. So if you're really thinking this through, you should be asking, why the heck did we bother doing all of that? We did all that work just to let someone from outside the class change stuff. How is this any different than the code we wrote before? There was no difference. You're still directly accessing the fields. You're just calling a method now and just added some more busy work. And you're right. You're 100% right. What we just did was pointless. So here's how we make it actually valuable. That was really just part one. We need to now add validation in our setter methods to prevent bad data from being passed in. So here's an example. In our setter method, setName, we're going to do some checks. If you give me null, or if you give me an empty string, I'm just going to say, that's invalid, you can't do that. And then I'm also going to call return, which just jumps out of the method and doesn't even continue. Okay, going back to product.java, let's look at our setName. In our setName, let's do some validation. So if name is equal to null, or name dot is empty, for now we're just going to print out invalid name. And here's the really important part. We have to call return. Return jumps out of the method and doesn't continue. So if you don't call this return keyword, it'll keep going. It'll come down here and keep running this line of code. You don't want that. Here's another way to do this. Instead of return, you could do something like this. If else, and then you have this dot name inside of here. This is also perfectly valid. This is basically saying do this or do that. I personally don't like this convention. It's a little too much syntax, so I prefer return. Okay, let's do one more. So let's look at our price. So think about price. What doesn't make sense for a price? Well, if it's negative, that would be bad. So if price is less than 0.0, we're going to print out invalid price. And then, again, we're going to return, telling Java, don't continue down here, just jump out of the method. So let's go ahead and test these out. I'm going to delete some of this old stuff. So I'm going to do product.setPrice, and I'm going to try to give it negative $1. When I run this, I get a print line statement saying invalid price, but also look at our price. It didn't change it. This is very important. We can't just give a message, we have to also prevent it from actually working. Now, if you're paying attention, you might realize this isn't enough. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this set price. What if I just pass in a bad value into the constructor? Nothing happened, and it still changed the price to -1. So we're not done with our validation. We also need to think about validation in our constructor as well. So don't we want to validate the constructor too? Yes. We could write the same validation logic twice, once in the constructor and once in the setter, but that sucks. we would repeat ourselves, and what if we forgot one? So another option is to just call the setter method in the constructor. So what we should do is something like this. I'm going to go ahead and delete all this. Instead of this.price, I'm just going to call the setPrice method and pass in the price. So it doesn't matter if I pass it into the constructor or call the setPrice method, it should still work. Now remember, we did the same thing with setName. So I'm going to go back down to our constructor, and instead of just directly setting the name, I'm going to call the setName method that we created and pass in the name. So now if I go back to main.java and I set in a price of -1 and try to run it, we get invalid price. And because of that, it just set the price to null. Well, actually, it never set the price. The default for a double is just null. It skipped over that code, but it still let you do everything else. Okay, let's talk about private methods. So private methods can only be accessed inside the class because that's what private means. So here's an example. Let's say instead of structuring the code we just did, let's say we wanted to do it in a slightly different way. We could have a validate price. What this means is we don't want the outside world to be able to call validate price. That's only for us inside the class. I call this a helper method. It helps you do things in the class, but you don't expose them to the outside world. So let's go back and write the same code, just doing it in a slightly different way. Okay, so let's create a new method. It's going to be private. It will return void. We'll call it validate price. It's going to take in a double called price. Then we'll check if price is less than 0.0. And we have to do this a little bit differently. So we do have to throw a new illegal argument exception. And we'll say invalid price. Don't worry. We will cover exceptions in the future. For right now, just know that this will end the program and is safe to use. Instead of having this check here, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And I'm going to call the validate price. And we know that if this executes successfully, it'll keep going and set the price. If it doesn't, it'll throw an exception and basically stop our program from executing. So let's go ahead and go back to main.java. I'm going to go ahead and run this again with price being -1 and see what happens. So we get an exception, and the exception is invalid price. So this is telling us, no, you can't create an object like this. You have to give us a good price. And notice that it never even got to this line of code because we gave it bad data. So again, exceptions are something we'll cover elsewhere. The point I'm trying to make is that if I come here to product and hit the dot operator, notice I cannot call the validate product method. And that's because I'm outside of the class. So coming back to product.java, this is a private method, can only be used inside the class, and it's a helper method. Helps us do stuff inside the class, but shouldn't be exposed to anyone outside the class. Okay, two more things. One is this whole process of making everything private and having getters and setter methods. This is called encapsulation. Encapsulation is hiding the internal details of an object and only exposing necessary parts to the outside world. Basically, controlled access. This is one of the 4 fundamental principles of OOP, or object-oriented programming. We're going to come back to this once we have all 4 of the fundamental principles to review. And there is one other access modifier. It's called protected. It's very easy to pick up. It'll be in your homework. And with that, do your homework. Good luck.